Alright, so let's take a look at how we can start sculpting in Rust and stuff like that. Now, I only use ZBrush really as a detailing tool, which means I use it to generate normal maps or height maps, or to use it to benefit my texturing. So right now you can see, in respect to detailing, there's all this rust, which could be done a lot quicker in ZBrush, and I can bend up this can a little bit better and scuff it up and things like that. So let's take a look at using just a standard brush, or we'll use the clay brush to just kind of really just carve out what this rust looks like. Now there's a couple things to keep in mind. When we go to generate the normal map or other textures from here, you have to remember that we actually, when we unwrapped it, we only unwrapped half of this. So for us to do an entirely different detail from one side to the next is really not going to be that beneficial, because when we go to render out the map, it's not going to show up. So what we have to do is we have to sculpt symmetrically. So what I'm going to do is just hit the X key. And what that's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to, again, whatever I sculpt on this side, it's going to update on the other side. And again, that's X as in Xerox that I hit. Alright? So let's take a look at the how I would actually subdivide my model to give me a little bit more geometry to sculpt. If you click here, which is polyframe, it's sort of like wireframe mode in Maya. You could see that we have a pretty, as you already know from modeling this, we have a pretty low resolution model here. So we need to up-res the number of edges or polygons that are here. So what I normally do is I go to the Geometry tab, and I would just normally just hit Divide. Now you can see here there's an actual problem here. And when I divide it, it actually smooths everything out. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Z to undo what I just did. And so right now you might be like, well, how do I subdivide something that's, that, like, so that it doesn't smooth? Well, there's an actual button here called SMT, the Subdivide Smooth Modifier. So I'm just going to uncheck that and hit Divide again. Now you might look at it now and be like, well, there wasn't really much of a change. Well, if you uncheck Polyframe and turn it back on, you can see it actually did subdivide it. So let's go ahead and divide this. I'm going to go up to level 7 at this point. Now, when you're sculpting a character, ideally you want to work with form. Like you want to just subdivide it once and then shape your character. Subdivide again. With hard surface objects, especially when you're only using it for detailing, it's okay to up-res this to about level 7 and then just work on the details. Okay? So again, you might say, well, it didn't subdivide. I don't see any other edge flow. Well, if you uncheck Polyframe and turn it back on, you can see it really did subdivide it a great amount. So I'm going to hold Shift here and just snap to my front view. And again, you can see that it's symmetrical. And I'm just going to start from this corner and just sort of look at roughing out the bigger details here. Okay? So let's start with, actually, now imagine that you're zoomed in this way and you're like, well, I can't really move or rotate or pan. Anywhere outside of this gray frame, if you hold Alt and left click, you can actually it'll still register your movements. Okay, let's look at our brush. So I'm going to hold spacebar down, and you can see here for draw size, I can increase or decrease my brush. Now, this model is still pretty huge because we brought it in 50 times its size. So you can see my brush isn't really growing that much. So ideally we should have brought it in at maybe 20 times its size, but that's okay. Again, we're only using this for detailing. So I'm going to zoom in on this area here. And the first thing I want to do is play with the bigger pieces here. Okay? Now, what I can use is I can click on here and I can hit the M key and select my move tool. And again, I'm going to bring my brush up as big as I can get it. And I'm just going to sort of move this geometry around and just kind of shape it. So something like this. And I'm holding Alt, just kind of going through and just really bending up the geometry. Okay. And I'll just sort of bend and move things like this. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to look at this overall piece and say, okay, where in here can I, what is the furthest area on this model? Because you want to sculpt from the deepest area out. And it seems like there's a deep crevice that runs all the way through the model here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my standard brush, hit S for standard. See if I could find him in here. There he is. And right away, when I click my standard brush, you could see it pulls out. That's not what I want to do. I want to push in. So the way to do that is you hold the Alt key down, and you can see that it pushes it in. Now I want this to be a little bit tighter, so I'm going to hit Control Z and hold spacebar. And I'm just going to bring my draw size down to about a little bit like that, and then I'm going to zoom in. And I'm holding Alt, and I'm just going to push in here. Now again, that's still too big, so maybe I'll zoom in a little bit more. Bring my draw size down. And again, I'm just sculpting out that crack in the front of my model. I'm going to hold Alt here. Again, I'm just pushing in until I reach the symmetry. There we go, on the other side. Because remember, it's pretty symmetrical. Alright, now you can see that there's a little bit of a raised surface next to it. So I'm just going to go in. Now its shortcut to increase your brush size without having to hold spacebar is the brackets, which are just located just below the plus and minus sign. And so the right bracket increases your brush size and the small. So again, I'm just going to draw a little bit of a line around this edge here and then here to kind of really increase that. Now that might be a little bit too pronounced, so I'm going to hold spacebar down. I'm going to lower my Z intensity here so that it's just very subtle. Bring that up just a little bit more. This. I'm going to hold Shift here to snap that again as I rotate. Now, I want to introduce another brush, which is the pinch brush, which is going to pinch this geometry and sharpen it out. Now it gets a little annoying having to constantly click in here, try to find your brush. So what I normally do is, right off the bat, you can see here there's different interface layouts. So if I click back once, you can see that there's a totally different interface here, where it takes your brushes and it spreads them out this way. And what it'll actually do is, if you have a newer version of ZBrush, it has an intuitive knowledge set, which will actually input the buttons that you use most. And you can actually change these brushes, and I'll show you those later. So let's go ahead and grab our pinch brush. And again, I'm going to increase the size here. And just sort of input, just kind of pinch that edge a little bit better. And if need be, I can jump over to my standard brush, add a little more geometry here, so that it really accentuates that area. Alright. Now if there's an area that I feel is too pronounced, like for example, I only want it to pinch at the top, but I don't want it to pinch down here, I'll bring my brush up, I'll hold Shift and smooth this out down at the bottom. You can see now it looks a lot more, it looks a great deal flatter than it did before. Alright, let's take a step back and kind of look at how that looks. Doesn't look bad. It might be, the gap might be too wide in some of the other areas, so I'm just going to grab my Move tool and shift this up. Now, because the model is so big, it's kind of hindering my modeling process, and that's okay. I can actually just click my Go Z button here and just hit Continue and let it reload into Maya. And I'm going to scale my model down from here. So maybe I'll go half the size. Hit Go Z again, hit Continue, let it re-update, and now if I jump up to level 7, let's check out how if our Move tool is a little bit easier to use. Yeah, you can see here that it's half the size, and it makes manipulating it a lot quicker and a lot faster. So that's something that you should be aware of as you move. Alright, I'm hitting about the 10-minute mark, and I want to keep these videos around 10 minutes. So in the next video, we'll take a look at how to start to model out the rust.